Good morning, church. Good morning to our church on the Zoom and on the YouTube, to our visitors, to our friends. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are still in the book of Judges. This will be the third week we've spent on the judge called Gideon. He was a shy lad at first, didn't see himself as being hero material. And you know, sometimes God sees what we don't. God saw something in Moses that Moses didn't even see. Same with Gideon, same with Jeremiah, same with Isaiah. You can go on down the line on a lot of well-known names in the Bible in their original. I'm taking my mask off. I'm warning you. They didn't have a lot of self-confidence. And sometimes it took God a lot of his patience to work with the individual that he had selected. In this case, it is Gideon. It's just a reminder that we are wearing masks while we're in the building, and I am at a safe distance. I have been fully vaccinated, had the monoclonal therapies, and right now I'm dealing with a stiff shoulder and a stiff neck, but do not confuse it as being a pain in the neck. I know I can be that way. So, we tie into the 300. How God had chopped down the army that had assembled at the head of General Judge Gideon. He cut it down by 22,000 the first time, sent them all home. Then there were 10,000 left, and God cut that down to 300, all because of how they drank their water. And so 9,700 left the field, leaving 300 to face 132,000 war-battled soldiers made up of Midianites, Ishmaelites, Amalekites, and they were going to go to war, and of course we know how that story ends in chapter 7. They got them on the run. Just to remind ourselves, we started with Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, the only female judge in this list, and then Gideon, and then Tola and Jair. If you've ever heard of a name Jair before, Jair Bolsonaro is the embattled president of Brazil. And then there, of course, there's Jephthah, and if I can read that right, Ibsen, not Ibsen, but Ibsen, and of course, Elon, Abdon, and we end up with Samson. That's in Judges. The last judge would really be Samuel. I've often felt that Moses and Aaron were sort of, Moses, Aaron, and Joshua, although they are not listed as judges, they are considered as judge-type leaders. The downward spiral of Israel in the book of Judges is just this. There is this cycle of sin, sort of like in and out. They're out with God, and then they're back in with God. And then they experience distress, and they cry out to God. Then God says, okay, I'll send you a rescuer. I'll send you a rescue judge. And guess what? When that judge dies, and every judge after that dies, the cycle of sin continues to go down. And if you look, it is going darker and darker all the time. It leaves Israel in dire distress, and it creates a greater darkness for them. And all that God wants is, be faithful to me, people. Serve me, love me, live a righteous life. Well, one of the first strikes against them was they didn't take the land the way God said they should have. And so the people that they left unchallenged in the land became their nemesis, became their adversary. And God used them to teach Israel a lesson about sin. So Judges chapter 8, verses 1 through 5, just to remind ourselves again, Israel continues to do evil in the sight of the Lord. And then there is repression after rebellion. God delivers them, sells them into the hand of their enemies. Then there is repentance, and they cry out to the Lord, and then there is restoration and peace. Here we are in the first two verses of chapter 8 of the book of Judges. Gideon's defeat of two kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. It says, then the men of Ephraim asked Gideon. Ralph, I kind of think there was a sort of a little bit of rivalry between Manasseh and Ephraim. Why are you treating us this way? Why didn't you call on us to join in the battle? Because God had cut the army down to 300 men, including Gideon, and no more. Why didn't you call on us when we went to fight the Midianites? And they argued with him fiercely. In other words, they didn't mince their words. And you know what Gideon does? He gives a soft reply, which is quite surprising. Gideon replied, what have I done compared to you? Aren't the grapes gleaned by Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer, his clan? God handed the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. As I said last week, those two names remind me of cleaning products. He says that God made it possible for Oreb and Zeb to be handed over. What have I done compared to that? And when the men of Ephraim heard his response, guess what? Their anger gave way, it subsided. What does that tell us about when we get into a situation where the heat is being turned up? People get upset. We look for peacemakers. We look for people to turn the heat down. Gideon certainly achieved that. He avoided that with the men of Ephraim. Gideon's battles, the men of Ephraim joined in the fight against Midian when Gideon called out to them. That is Judges 7, verses 24 to 25. Yet they were quite upset, as I said, that Gideon did not call on them to fight before the battle started. That is with the 300 and the Midianite camp containing 132,000 fighters. Gideon's initial call for help went out to the tribes of Manasseh, his own tribe, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. That is recorded in Judges chapter 6 and verse 35. This will just give you an idea of where the battles were being fought and how it all sort of focused in on a central area just near the Jordan River. Then we have the refusal of the Men of Sukkoth. And you're saying, what was all that about? How is Gideon going to handle this? Will he come back with a soft answer? Well, let's find out. Verses 4 through 7, Gideon and his 300 men, they've got Midian on the run. They are in mopping up operations.
Good, thank you.
God?
No, we just got sound. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Gideon and his 300 men, they were exhausted. And they were still in pursuit of the enemy, the Midianites, the Ishmaelites, the Amalekites, all of those ites. You know, why couldn't they have done that the first time when Joshua took them in to Canaan? Joshua and Caleb, by the way, were the only two. He says, give us a couple of mountains here, and we'll clear this lot out. But that was not the report of the 10. So, Gideon's 300 men, they are worn out. They're still in pursuit of the enemy. They come to the Jordan River, and they cross it. Gideon says to the men of Sukkoth, because Sukkoth and Penul are quite close to one another. He says, please give us provisions. Give us loaves of bread. I don't think they were just asking for bread slices. They were asking for food, refreshment, so that they could eat, rest a bit, and continue on pursuing Midian. Please give us loaves of bread to the people following me, because they're very tired and I'm chasing, he calls them the kings of Midian. Zebah and Zalmunna. But the officials of Sukkoth, this is what they said. So, do you already have the hands? That's kind of odd, isn't it? Do you have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession so that we would agree to give you provisions, to give you bread, to give you refreshment? Do you have them in your possession? Show us the hands. So Gideon says, very well then, the Lord has handed Zebah and Zalmunna over to me. It's guaranteed. I will flail your flesh with thorns and with briars from the wilderness when I get back. Now that's quite a different way to handle a situation. It was different with Ephraim, but he didn't like the attitude and the tone of the commanders and the elders, the officials that represented the town of Sukkoth. This is Gideon's vow to those officials and elders. He does the Arnold Schwarzenegger thing. I'll be back. And I'm bringing with me thorns and briars to tear the flesh off your bodies. Ooh. No more than Mr. Nice Guy here. So, now we come to the refusal of Penul's officials. That's the next village or city to Sukkoth. The NIV Cultural Background Study Bible says, whereas in verse 25 of chapter 7 of Judges, Oreb and Zeb had been identified as leaders or kings or princes. And the phrase, do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? What was that all about? It would sound like, do you have them in your hands? No. Do you have the hands of these fellas? Literally, are the palms of the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand? Alluding to the ancient Near Eastern custom, military practice, of cutting off the hands of your captives and taking these back to the base to show the troops, to show whoever wants to see them, that we have now a tally of who died in the battle on the other side. Counting hands. Though Gideon, the call to the people of the city of Sukkoth to support those who fought in the battle, they were not asked to engage in the actual battle, but simply to be supporters on the front line. Judges 8, 4 through 7. Verses 8 through 9, it says, from there Gideon went up to Penul, asked the same thing from them, and they answered just as the men of Sukkoth. Maybe they were reading from a script. Or maybe that's the way they were. Maybe they didn't like Gideon being a general and a judge over them. So he told the men of Penul, when I come in peace, when I come back in victory, I'm going to tear down this tower of yours. They must have been really proud of this tower. Remember the Tower of Babel? That came crashing down for man's audacity to try and reach God with their technology and their know-how. They didn't make it. So when I come in peace, I will tear down this tower. This is Gideon's vow, the second vow to the officials and elders of Penul. The NLT Illustrated Study Bible says this: Sukkoth and Penul or Penuel were both Israelite cities. Their loyalty to Gideon, maybe as in their minds as an upstart general, was at best quite thin. The tribes of the east of the Jordan were continually being exposed to Midianite oppression, pressure, and apparently they feared the might and the power of the Midianites more than they feared what maybe Gideon might do. Here is a map, and the map shows quite clearly the pathway of Gideon's battles and how he is heading towards Karkor. And that's where he will capture and bring back victory to the people of God. Verses 10 through 12, now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with about 15,000. That was all that was left of their army, which was all that remained of the army in the east, because 120,000 had already been killed. And that's 240 40,000 palms. And I can just see now Gideon shouting, "Can someone lend a hand here?" Gideon traveled up by the route of tent dwellers. It was there for ages, for the ancient, east of Nobah and Jogabah, and attacked the army, taking them all by surprise, just like he did in the Midianite camp in the previous chapter with 300. He took them by surprise. Zebah and Zalmunna, the two Midianite kings, they ran away. So he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, throwing the rest of the army into a panic. Midian's might and power at this point has been clipped and consigned to the annals of history. They will not rise again like they did before. The Illustrated Study Bible from NLT, the New Living Translation, says, apparently the Midianite remnant was with its two kings, felt reasonably secure. You know, we are outside of where the Israelites could come. Having reached the Transjordan Plateau en route to their traditional desert haunts. You remember what they did at harvest time? They could come right in like a plague of human locusts and gobble up all the wheat, everything they could lay their hands on, including ox and donkey and whatever. They were sort of a, if you will, mafiosa of Canaan. This put them well beyond typically Israelite territory, so they thought. Gideon, as he had done before, verses 19 through 22 of chapter 7, he takes the Midianite army all by surprise, capturing their two kings, routed their army, thus effectively eliminating the present and future threat of Midianite retribution that was feared by the leaders of Sukkoth and Penul. Verse 28. So Gideon takes down 77 names. Oh, I love this bit. I really do. So, verses 13 to 14. Gideon, Joash's son, returned from battle by way of the ascent of Heres. He captures a young man that belonged to the village of Sukkoth, or the city of Sukkoth. And they question him, and the young man gives up willingly. I don't know. He gives up a list of the officials, commanders and elders of Sukkoth for him, 77 of them. The ESV Archaeology Study Bible, which I have at home, the term for young man is na'ar, which refers to one being trained for service as an elder, as a wise man. But you can't be a wise man until you've lived longer. So, archaeologists and historians have debated the level of, for instance, literacy among the ancient Israelites. At this time, the alphabet was replacing older scripts. The development of the alphabet, which averaged somewhere between 20 to 25 symbols, which made it this easier to teach and disseminate and allowed a wider spread for literacy amongst the people. now. Have you ever seen the movie A Bad Day at Black Rock? This is the Judges version, chapter 8. A bad day for Sukkoth in Penul. Verses 15 to 17, chapter 8. Then Gideon went to the men of Sukkoth and said, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna. You taunted me about them, saying, 'So, do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession so that we will give up our bread to your exhausted men?' So he takes the elders of the city and teaches them a lesson. With thorns, with briars, pulled out of the wilderness. And he also went over to the tower of Penul and killed the men of the city and tore down that fancy tower of theirs. You could see it for miles. Now it's gone, along with the men, the officials, the commanders of those two cities. Verses 18 to 21. Gideon asks, I've entitled the header here, Gideon cuts down Zebah and Zalmunna. You know, in chapter 6, when we find out who Gideon is and how God has chosen him to be a commander, a general, a judge, he doesn't see himself in any of those categories. But as time goes on, when he meets the angel of the Lord, which I think is a theophany, the way God presents himself to man. There's also a Christophany, the way Christ presents himself to man. And also there is the term angelophany, which is how an angel, just a regular angel, presents themselves to man. But in this case, I truly believe it was God talking. Gideon asks Zebah and Zalmunna, what kind of man did you kill at Tabor? And they said, now I want you to listen, they were just like you. Every one of them looked like the son of a king. How does that strike your ears by the way I have read it to you? Was it flattery, hoping that they would be allowed to live? Or is it a diss? Is it a mocking way of taking Gideon down a few things? And by the way, what else did Gideon cut down or pull down during his journey from zero to hero? He pulled down the altar of Baal. He cut down the Asherah poles. He cut down the enemy with 300. He cut down the Midianite army by 120,000, leaving 15. And now he has cut down that number. And he has brought not just the palms, the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna. He has brought proof that the Midianite army is no longer a threat to Israel. He's a savior. So they were just like you. Every one of them looked like a son of a king. Gideon replied, oh yeah? They were my brothers. They were my countrymen. They were my next door neighbors. The sons of my own mother, he says. So in that group, we know that Gideon fathered 70 children, and some of them died in battle. As surely as the Lord lives, oh, Here he makes another vow. If you had spared their lives, I wouldn't kill you. You'd get to live. So he says to Jether. Now, who's Jether? His firstborn, his oldest child. Kill him. But he was afraid. Jether did not draw his sword because he was still a young boy, not a young man, but a young boy, and was afraid. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, oh, I love this bit. Well, if the boy can't do it, why don't you do the job yourself? Rise up and kill us yourself, for a man is judged by his strength. Those are fighting words, church. So Gideon arose, and guess what he did? He gave him the chop. He killed them both and took the crescent ornaments that were on their camels' necks, sort of like tricked out camel to look like a Cadillac. Yeah. You know, the kind of transportation that kings have. Was this said to mock and humiliate him? Well, it didn't work, because they were killed as their rank, perhaps, as they expected. Maybe they didn't think they were going to live, but they didn't want to die a humiliating kind of death by a kid or a woman. Remember the tent peg? Sisera? He died with a bad headache. So, the NLT, covering verses 18 to 21, says, matters concerning honor dominated this interaction as is given here in the chapter. Death at the hand of a woman or a child was considered to be a dishonorable death. You can read Judges 5, 24 to 27, and also read on further on Judges 9, chapter 9, verse 54. Verses 22 to 24, the Israelites said to Gideon, and my headline here for you is, hey fellas, I don't want to be king. However, I have but this request. Does fame spoil a man? Can it go to his head? You know, I've said all along about these judges as we make our way through these judges. In many respects, in some respects, not all, there are flaws to be observed because they're men. We are men. We are men and women. We are made of flesh. The Israelites said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson, for you have saved us from Midian. And Gideon replies, what would be the right answer? He gave the right answer. I will not rule over you, neither will my son, for the Lord will rule over you. What was it that upset Samuel when the people asked for a king just like all the other nations around them had? God says, they have not rejected you, Samuel. They have rejected me from being king. Remember that. So he says, however, I will make one request of you. Each of you give me an earring. Do you remember when earrings got fashionable again here in America? You see a lot of earrings on men these days, right? Not just women. But I have yet to see, fashionable stuff, but, there are things put through earlobes and all kinds of things, studs all the way around the ear, etc. I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying you see more of it. And it was the same in that part of the world for ages. I will make one request. Give me an earring from the plunder you collected from your fallen enemies. They had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. The NLT Illustrated Study Bible reminds us Ishmaelites and Midianites were both descendants of Abraham. Genesis 16:15 and Genesis 25, verse 2. And you say to yourself, what was Gideon thinking? Were Gideon's intentions all good? I don't want to be king. I don't want any of my kids to be king or my grandkids to be king. Only God can be king. But please, could I have some earrings? 43 pounds worth of gold, 1,700 shekels in weight of gold. He could wear a pair of earrings every day for several years and not have the same pair on. The NIV cultural background on earrings says this. In the Near East, in the ancient Near East, both men and women, they did wear earrings. The earrings involved, say in the accounts of Jacob's family gods, Genesis 35, verse 17, I cite the golden calf. They melted down a lot of the gold, and a lot of it was made up of earrings and things like that. And the present account in Judges are not simply arbitrary items of jewelry. Rather, these earrings represented something quite different. It represented the relationship between a deity and its worshiper on several levels. Since deities are often portrayed with holes in their ears or as wearing earrings, they represent precious gifts from the devotee to their chosen deity. It is similar to piercing the ear of a slave who chose not to leave his master. Pierced ear symbolized the worshiper's devotion to a deity. Attached to the organ of listening, the earrings reminded the devotee to be ever attentive to the voice of his deity or her deity, like Aaron, Exodus 32, Gideon melting down the gold and used it to make a sacred object of worship, an ephod. With Aaron, they created, this is the God who brought you out of Egypt, an Apis bull. What was he thinking? Gideon's golden ephod, or is it his golden blunder? Israel ends up venerating the golden ephod. Verses 25 to 27, we're coming down to the wire. The Israelites said, we will give them willingly, because you saved us. Why didn't Gideon say, no, I didn't save you, God did? The weight of the gold earrings was 1,700 shekels. Here's Roger going to ring that first bell. Hope you get lost and can't find it. So it weighed 43 pounds of solid gold, not including the crescent ornaments and pendants. The Midianite kings, all their purple garments, the chains on their camels' necks. Gideon made this into an ephod. How much of that would have gone into an ephod? All of it? And he put it in his hometown of, not Ophrah, Ophrah. And guess what Israel did, as they have done even since their days in Egypt? They prostituted themselves by worshiping it, and it became a snare or a trap for Gideon and his family, as well as Israel. Where did he keep it? You know, an ephod, originally for a priest, was a linen garment. The high priest's ephod was a little bit more complex. And right in front of the breastplate, or behind the breastplate, is this fabric that is made up of red and purple threads, and woven into it is gold itself. It would have been a rather heavy article to wear. It was a trap. It was a snare. The ephod became just like Nehushtan. In the book of Kings, it turns out Israel, since their days in the desert with God and worshiping that Apis bull, what did God do? He sent what? Fiery serpents. And the only way that they could be saved was after Moses makes a bronze serpent and he says, look and you will live. So what's in their luggage all these years? That bronze serpent. And it also had the name of Nehushtan, that detestable thing, because it too had become a trap for Israel. You know, church, there's nothing wrong with crosses. But don't worship the cross, please. Paul says, I have determined to know nothing amongst you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Paul did not worship the cross. He worshiped the Christ upon that cross. And thankfully, who didn't stay on that cross. Because without Him, we would not live eternally. So, the Cultural Background Study Bible says, he puts Gideon's apparent rejection of, I don't want to be your king. Although Gideon appears to reject the Israelites' invitation and start a hereditary dynasty, by Near Eastern standards, all his actions hereafter are typical of what potentates did. He claims the lion's share, verses 24 to 26, of the plunder. He claims the purple garments owned by the two Midianite kings. He sets up a worship center And I tend to believe that it's either in a special building or it's in his house itself. He had an alternate name given to him the day that he tore down the altar of Baal. He was called Jerubbaal, son of Joash, he who contends with Baal. He establishes a large harem and fathers 70 to 71 sons, maybe more. He calls his son Abimelech, which means, my father is king, from a concubine out of Shechem. Did it mean God, my father, is king? Or my father Gideon is king? Next week, we're going to take a little trip in chapter 9 and follow what happens to Abimelech, who is not a judge, but he wants to be king. And it's not always good to be king. We'll stop there.